Hello, welcome to Therapies Documentation Orientation video. So I'm going to basically start off with just where your screen would be when you log in and you're on your patient list. You will notice in the future that you'll have a button and a tab here, one for ED status board and patient list, and that will be when we go live with those accountable care unit status boards. For now, we'll focus on the patient list. That's because your regular day-to-day practice. So it's been a while since we've done any orientation. I'm just going to go over a couple basic things of what you see on the screen here before we dive right into the documents. Up at the top of the screen, we have what we call the file menu. And really, there's not a lot up in this section that would apply to you other than the button for preferences. And we're going to review a couple of preferences today as we go through things. The three that I'm going to take a look at is toolbar preferences, document entry preferences, and acronym expansion preferences. Preferences are personal settings for how you do your work and improve things. Below that, that row of icons we see is what we call the main toolbar. The arrows allow you to scroll through patients that are in your patient list or on the status board. Find patient is a function you use if you need to search for patients that are not currently showing on any of your patient lists. The enter document icon, which is currently grayed out, is how you will start any new document. It's not how you will modify a document that already is existing, but it's how you will launch any new document. And those are primarily the tools that you'll use out of the main toolbar. The blue bar going across the top is called the patient header. It will display the patient's name, their room and bed location, who their physician is, birth date and age, and their admission date when they are selected from a list. And that is how you identify who you are documenting on and whose chart you're reviewing at that time. Below that is the tabs, which you are mostly already familiar with. Basically, the first button is your view, or tab is your view, and then the rest of the tabs are the patient's chart. Below that, another row of icons, and those are what we call the tab toolbar icons. So they will always appear underneath the tabs, and they will change depending on what tab you have selected. Below that then is a section where you can select your list. Your profiles are generally pre-populated with our main unit lists, so emergency department, ICU 4, 5, and 6. But you can create your own lists as well by using the new visit list, and you can modify lists with the second icon. The lists that are here currently are what we call live patient lists or enterprise defined patient lists. So they're built specifically just for a location. And basically, patients should appear on these lists when they're registered, disappear when they're discharged. I know at the moment there are some inaccuracies on the lists, and that probably will be an ongoing thing until we work through some processes. There are some actions that happen in the registration system that cause visits to get stuck in SCM. And I've been working with registration on a process to remove those. We just haven't had a lot of time to sit down and work through those right now. So I'm going to select a patient on the patient list here, and you'll see that now I have information populated up in the header here. All the other tabs in the chart have become active, and the enter document is also active up here. Just going to do a quick brief review of the tabs. Orders tabs. Basically, we don't do electronic order entry, so you won't often find a lot here, but lab and DI results flow into SCM. So those orders actually are visible on this orders tab if once they've been entered in our lab information and radiology information systems. Just lets you know what has been ordered and if they've been processed. There's a status column on here that'll say basically they're pending, meaning that the requisition's in the system. If it's been performed, it means the x-ray has been taken, but the radiology report hasn't been associated with it yet or attached to it or completed. and then one or more final results, which then allows you to go to the results tab. These options panels accompany most tabs, and they are sort of very similar to a preferences. The two things that I will just show you briefly is the chart selection and the date range. So each tab has a preset or a default for chart selection. The orders tab, it's this chart, meaning this registration or registration into the system. And the date range, there will be a date in there from and to, and and then underneath the date range, it'll also have a verbal description. So for orders, it's this chart, and from the start of this chart, you will have the orders displayed on your screen. When we move to the results tab, the default is all available charts, which means that you wouldn't have to change anything in your selections to see order or results from previous visits. But the date range default is set to 1 week ago. So what you would see on your screen is results for lab and DI within the last week. Now, limitations within SCM is that we only see orders and results that are performed within the hospital. We don't see orders or results that have been done at labs outside of the hospital. However, the EHR viewer does connect to that. And I see I'm missing the tab for the viewer here. I'm not sure if you guys use the EHR viewer, but if you do, we can have a tab here so you can link directly to the viewer from within SCM. To change the date range of what you see on the screen in front of you, you click on the little arrow from the from date, and there's some quick picks. So the default is 1 week ago, and then you can pick a number of different options there. And if you're looking for specific date ranges, you can pick custom and use the calendar to change what you're seeing on your screen for results. Results can also be displayed in a graph format. So if you go to the icon for display format, sorry, that's not the one I wanted to show you. If you go to down here, your different views, the default is trend view. You can also do trend and graph. It'll place a graph view on the bottom, and then you can just select an item of the results and it will plot it on the graph with the same date range that you have selected in your view for the date range. Patient info tab, basically, you can view health issues, which is admitting diagnosis, significant events we don't currently use in Prince Albert, neither do we use alerts in the allergies and intolerance right now. You can see care providers, so it will display the attending, admitting, and family physician as it's been entered in the registration system. Health issues will display the admitting diagnosis as well as any infection control alerts that are in WinKISS or the registration system, address, phone, and contact information from within the registration system, demographic visit data, just a different way of displaying some information about their visit. If you're looking for their health card number or their paper chart number, you can click on this little blue details in the middle on the right. And it pops up with a demographic table, and up at the top you can see there's other IDs. So the PHN is the provincial health number, and the VHID is their paper or old file number in health record system. The regional ID is also an identifier for the patient within our region, and it is the one that you will also see up in the patient header linked with the patient. The visit history allows you to see any registrations the patient has had into our facility since 2011 when we started using SCM. So it'll just be a list of visits. So if you're looking for when they maybe were admitted or had last been in the emergency department, you would be able to find it under this visit history on the patient info tab. Documents tab, I'm sure you're familiar with from reviewing nursing documentation. Again, the options panel, it's all available charts from the start of all charts. So all documents that had ever been entered on the patient would be listed by default when you first log in. You can change those. You single click on a document, you can preview on the right side, double click on them, they open in a standalone window. They can be grouped by author, by date, by document name. So depending on what type of review you're wanting to do within the chart, there's filter options there as well. Flow sheets link to our vital signs, which of course are done on only our medicine and surgical units. Clinical summary tab is a number of tiles that pull information from different documents as well as from the registration system and lab to just give you a quick overview of patient information. The visit record review tab allows you to just review everything that has occurred or happened within a visit in sort of a book read. So everything that if there were from all of these tabs, orders, results, patient info, documents, flow sheets, will all be in this tab. So anything that had been entered on this visit, so we've picked this particular visit, registration, and if you wanted to look at different visits, you could click the arrow and, if there was an emergency department visit that you wanted to review, you could select that one. If you wanted to review an older admission inpatient visit, there would be a list here. You could click on them. You can click on show all documentation. By default, looks like it is set to just show the last 5 days. So you can click on show all documentation and then everything would be displayed here. And you could just literally scroll through, read all documentation, nursing documents. And if you wanted to just focus on or go to a specific section of the chart, you can just select from the panel on the side here. The timeline tab just gives you an overview of registrations to the hospital placed on a timeline. So any registration would show up here. Your dates of the timeline are on the bottom. And if you click on any of these visits, it basically opens up the visit record view for that visit. So now to focus on what this is really about, and that's documenting. So to launch a new document, we're going to use the Enter document. When you first click on it, it loads to your personal or defaults to a personal list of documents. And because we haven't set up your personal list or you haven't set up your personal list, it's a blank list at the moment. If you're at this point and you don't have time to go create your personal list right now, you can click on the little drop down arrow and select Start of Browse. And that will give you a link basically or a tree to all our current documentations. So right now we're focusing on inpatient, interprofessional practice, and then there would be a list of all the documents that are under the interprofessional practice part of the tree. So it includes pharmacy, respiratory therapy, and all the therapy services documents. I'm going to close this so that I can show you how to set up your personal document list. This is where we're going to go up to those preferences and go to document entry. And once we go to document entry, we've got that tree of documents. And then over here, it's showing what are currently selected to be on our personal document list. So we would click on inpatient and expand it, expand the interprofessional practice, and then you would highlight the documents that you wanted to add to your personal list. And I don't believe you can highlight multiples. Nope, you have to do them one at a time. So highlight it, add it, and then move on down the list and build your personal document list. So I'll just add a few of them right now. And once I say close, the next time I go back to enter document, I now have that list in my personal document so that I don't have to go to the tree. The other option is if you have a search tool up here and all the therapy services documents start with TS. So you can always click up there and type TS and it's going to present you with all the documents that are available under therapy services. So a few different ways to navigate through the preferences or your personal document list to find the document you want to have. just going to look briefly at this top section here. The date of service and time are basically when you had the encounter with the patient. So when you create a note, it's going to save it as it was authored at such and such a time, which is now. However, if your encounter with the patient was, a few hours ago, you can update and specify. So this encountered for date of service and time is at this header. When you're selecting your document, you will also be able to edit this within the document itself once we open it. There's a few other modifications that can happen here, such as modifying the author date and time as well, and who it was authored by. So there are times if somebody got locked out of the computer or there was a system down, we need to revert to charting on paper. And after the system comes back up, sometimes we would like to re-enter some of that data into the electronic chart so that there is a nice flow to the information. We don't have to do that. The paper charting will remain on the paper chart. We should make a note in a progress note when the system comes back up that there is reference material within the paper file as well as the electronic chart. Depending on, like, some of our other documents have data that pulls into reports. So sometimes, say in the emergency department, when they've been down and they've had to do their triage notes on paper, when the system comes back up, they have a process where they've determined in the department that they will enter just key pieces of information into the electronic form, not having to recopy everything from that paper document into the electronic form because of time and staffing restrictions as well. So again, those tend to be departmental decisions as to what if things are on paper, what needs to be transcribed into the electronic chart versus what can just remain on the paper. When there is a retranscribing from paper into the electronic record, that's where this authored time and who are adjustable or modifiable. So if you're re-entering documentation that somebody else had done on paper and you're just doing the copying into the electronic chart, you can say, I wasn't the author, someone else was the author, so that SCM captures and displays it in the note that, this was the author and this was the person who entered the document. And then there's also opportunity for the primary author to sign off on the electronic document as well. All right, I'm going to open up one of the biggest documents we have to start with, and that's the Therapy Services Assessment. So I can highlight it and double click on it, or I can go to the Open button down here and maximize. I always recommend maximizing. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you see on the screen here. So up at the top, you can see there's those date of service and time windows that you can adjust if you need to. There's a menu bar that has a button for what we call copy forward, refer to note, preview, modify template, and acronym expansion. And I'm going to kind of explain what each of those do a little bit later. On the right-hand side right now, we have a preview window. We've got the document entry in the middle, and on the left here is what we call a sections panel. And right now it's very difficult to read all the sections. This is something that may or may not appear the first time you log in. There's a header that says sections at the top here and a small tack to the right in the right-hand corner. And if I click that tack, it will actually unpin that section so that it just tucks away at the side. So depending on the size of your monitor, you may not want it always pinned to your screen. If I hover over this sideways tab here, it will pop out the sections panel and I can navigate through it. I can collapse all the sections so that if there's a specific area I want to go to, I can go to that one and then expand the pieces that are under there. And if that's where I want to document, if I click on that, my document will then move right to that section. So you don't have to continually sort of scroll through and try to find where you are on the note. You can use this sections panel to navigate quickly to different sections within the note. If you want to repin it, You just go up to that header where it says sections, click on the tack, it will pin it, and you can also resize it depending on visually what and space-wise what works for you on your monitor. So that's one navigation part of the note. You also have your scroll bar on the side here. If you click inside the note, you can use the roller button on your mouse to scroll through things. When you're completing the note, if you're familiar with using a tabbing to skip from one field for the next, that works in general. So I'm in this field. If I hit tab, it goes to the next field. And when I hit tab again, it will highlight these multi-select fields. So I don't know, it'll be probably difficult to see, but the other specify has sort of a dotted box around it, meaning that's where I'm selected. If I actually want to check off that box, I can use my space bar to select it and then tab again. The only time tabbing will not work is when it comes to these single select options, or what we call radio buttons, so where it's little circles. When I click there, my tab skips right into the free text fields and skips completely over them. It doesn't work to select in these. You have to use your mouse to click into these radio buttons. Radio buttons are an either yes or no or selected or not selected. You can't select more than one of them. If you click on a radio button and it's not what you intended to click on and you want to clear it out, if you click on it again, it will not clear out. You need to right click and delete the data to clear out any radio button selections. When it comes to the squares that are multiple select, it works by just clicking on and off to clear it and select it. Types of fill in the blanks. So we've got some drop downs. There's some free text boxes, date and time stamps, the multi-select, which are the squares, single choice options or radio buttons are the circles. Free texts have character limits, so even though the boxes look small, they can contain a lot more information than what you can just visually see. Date and time stamps. You can click inside and they do have how they, the formatting day, day, month, month, month with letters and then the year. You can click on the C, which will give you a calendar to select off of. The T, I haven't quite figured out what that does. And the clock. The clock, if you click on that, will put in a right now date and time stamp into those fields, which is the quickest and easiest way to get all the information in a field. And then if you need to adjust it, you can just click on either the date or the hour and type over it, or use the arrows to go up and down and extend it. So, we've got a date and time for admission date and then another one for the surgery date. So click on the clock, gives you a right now stamp, and then you can click on the date itself and adjust it. Free text is exactly what it is. You just enter your free text in there. There's a spell checker built in. So when you see a red line underneath your letters, it indicates that it's not recognizing that as a word, and you can right click and it will pop up. It's a medical spell checker, so it has things like if I enter Tylenol with a small t, it will mark that as an error, and then it presents me with the option with capital, even though it's not necessarily incorrect when it's not capitalized. Orange stars indicate what we call mandatory fields. So a form cannot be saved unless that field has had data entered into it. A lot of the therapies forms have a services field. So when you're documenting, you can click on that and select the service. If multiple services are entering on the same note, so perhaps PT has entered on this one and then OT is going to come and update it. If there's already a note existing and it's going to be added to by another one, you want to add it as a combination field. We've also created an option just to select therapies if there are multiple roles documenting on the same form. So once you have finished entering, or you've entered as much as you can at this moment in time, and you may come back and add some information afterwards, you want to save the note. If you click Save and Continue, it will save the note and just leave it open on your screen. If you click Save and Close, it'll save it and close the note. Each time you save a note, it's going to ask you to re-authenticate, and that is the system ensuring that the person who's logged into SCM is the same person who is creating the note. And so you will need to enter your password, and it's always the same password as what you have set as the computer. Side note to mention on passwords, if you get that prompt that your password has expired and you're going to it tells you to click here to create a new password. And if you click on that and create a new password while you're logged into SCM, the SCM password or authentication and the network authentication is going to be broken. So anytime you change your password, be sure you log off of SCM. Ideally, you log right out of the computer, re-log in with your new password, and then reopen SCM. If you change your password and you've already been logged into SCM, and then you go to create a document, when you go to save it and put in your password, it's not going to accept your old password or your new password, because what it's looking for is a match. And because you would have logged into SCM with the old password and the network is now recognizing a new password, you'll never be able to get them to match. So whenever there's a password change, make sure you're logged out of SCM and re-log into SCM with the new password. So once I've saved a document, in order to review it, I'm going to go to the Documents tab, and you can see that it's now displaying on the Documents tab. This preview panel on the right side is also a preference setting, and it was a preference setting within the node. It's also on this screen. So if I go to the tab toolbar icon that says Preview, it's clicked or checked off on the right side. You can change it to set your preview of your note on the bottom of the screen, or you can turn it off completely. Again, personal preferences. You can notice in the document name, we have it set up so that whatever is selected in that drop down for the service is going to display beside the note. So you're always going to be able to sort notes by services or view them by services. It's going to tell me that, the date of service shows up here, the time of the service, when it was authored, which visit it was authored on, and who was the author and who signed off on the note with an electronic signature, and then the information that was entered into the note. If I'm going to add additional information, or if I am another service that's adding additional information, we only want to create one of these notes, definitely per shift when it comes to progress, or per 24 hours when it comes to progress notes. Because even when you modify a note, it's always going to remain attached to its original date in the list here. So, with all the nursing charting and pharmacy charting and now therapies charting, notes can get way down in the bottom of the list and therefore not reviewed. And those are basically practices or workflows to be determined within the department when it comes to, your assessment like this. Is there one assessment per visit? Or do you do multiple assessments on a visit? So again, decisions made within the department. If I need to add something, I'm going to highlight the note and then I want to modify it. So there is a modify icon in the tab toolbar. If I right click on the note, I also have a modify option here. If I've double clicked on the note and opened it up in its standalone window, there's a tab for modify there as well. So modify will reopen the note exactly as it was when I left off. I can add a new statement in the same fields. Add new information. And then when I'm done, save it again. So my additions, any addition changes will just be presented here as an addition into the note, not necessarily identifying anything. It'll, show it was last updated there. Anybody who has the rights to documentation can modify any note. It doesn't have to be just a note that you created yourself. Um, just to show you how the system captures and tracks modifications, changes, corrections, when they occurred, and who made them. You can highlight your note, and then you can either go to the icon for view here and go to view corrections, or you can right click and select corrections. When you click on that, it opens up a version of the note that basically shows ongoing modifications or changes. So anytime you open a document and modify something, it captures a point in time view of the note. So there's a row of stars going across the page here, and below that row of stars is the original version of the document. And then when I opened it to modify it, I made a couple changes. So this is saying at this point in time, these are the things that were changed in the document. So if there was something previously in the field, it's going to redline out everything that was there on the original and then replace it with everything that's there now. So where I added the additional information, you can see when you check, okay, that wasn't there before, but this first sentence was there before. If there had been no information in there previously, it's just going to mark it with a red C, highlighting that this is a change or a correction that was made into this field. If the document is open to be modified again, it's going to create another snapshot of it, indicating the changes made at that modification. Not something that you're going to look at regularly, but I do like to let people know that, you never actually lose anything. You say, hey, I'm sure I charted this on this patient and now it's not showing. Did somebody delete it or remove it? And the system would capture all those changes. If you need to print a document for any reason, maybe to send somewhere with the patient for information, or somewhere else for a referral or something like that, you have to double click and open in its standalone window, and then the printer icon is in the top left corner. So that's the only way to print these. There's no printing sort of from that main page. You have to double click, open it, and then you can print it. So I'm going to go back into this Preferences tab here and take a brief look at acronym expansion. So when you're typing in those free text fields, I know a lot of times even in our paper charting, we start creating our own sort of shorthand or short versions of typing in the acronyms. And we know there's lots of harping and legal repercussions for documenting with acronyms. So what SCM allows you to do is actually create a dictionary of acronyms that you would typically use in your documentation. So that you can continue to type in that short form and the system will put in the broader form. So I already have some acronyms that I've added into my acronym dictionary. If I want to add something else, I just click on the add. And it is recommended that any acronym that you add, you put a dot in front of it, just so that anytime you're typing with acronyms, it's identified with a dot. You don't have to, it's just a recommendation. It is critical with certain acronyms. For instance, if I wanted to use the letters IT as an acronym, well, that is also a word, it. And it could stand for information technology. So if I want the system to be able to tell the difference when I want it to just use IT as the word it, and when I want to actually use it as an acronym, I just type the one with the period in front of it, and that makes it identifiable as an acronym. So if I put IT there as my acronym, and when I type IT, I want it to type out information technology. I put my acronym, and you need to make sure you don't put a space after your last word in your acronym. It'll tell you that it's an error, that you can't have a trailing white space. And then I can say OK, and it's added to my acronym list. Want to point out that acronyms are case sensitive. So with 2 letters, I can have several combinations. I can have IT in both lowercase letters, and then it will give me whatever I've linked to it in that format. I could have them both uppercase and have a different expanded text associated with that. I could have 1 letter lowercase and 1 letter uppercase and have different acronym or expanded text associated with each of those. You can create a full paragraph in your expanded text, and you can create fill in the blank fields. So in this case, I've created one, say, if I was going to do an abdominal assessment. I want to modify that, I can edit it. It doesn't act like a command prompt system that you maybe would use for dictation, and you had created a command with fields where you could, if you're dictating, you can just go next field, next field, next field. These are still manually editing, but you can, if you have sort of standard paragraphs where you just enter in certain variables for the patient, you can build those out in the acronym expansion as well, if it makes it quicker for when you're doing your documentation. So then when I go to a note, and I type in one of my acronyms and hit the space bar, it just puts in my full expanded acronym. So then in this case, I could put and continue on, filling in the blanks like that. But it is manual to clear out my brackets. I put my brackets in there to remind me what it is exactly that I wanted to type into those areas and fill in the information. And then if I did my .it and hit my space bar, it puts out information technology. If you're in the middle of typing a note and you realize you're typing something in short form that you hadn't thought of before, and you're like, oh, whoops, you can just highlight it and copy it with Control V, or Control C. And you can go right into your acronym expansion from the dictionary and add your acronym. And as soon as I hit the space bar, it now is part of the acronym. So acronym expansion can be directly from within the note while you're typing, or you can work on it from the preferences if it's something you're just taking a few minutes to add a few acronyms on the spot. The other thing that you can do is import acronyms from another user. So if you have somebody who's super keen on creating acronyms and they get quite an expansive list, then you can click on the bar here that says import from other user, and then that list turns to a drop down of all different users. And you can highlight them and go through their list of acronyms and just check off the ones that you want to add to your list and say okay, and then they're added to your list. So that covers acronym expansion. I'm going to take a look at this modify template here. So this is not something you're going to use on a daily basis within the therapies notes, but it may change over time. Basically, what we see over here in the sections panel is the template of the note. So it has all the sections that are built into the note and that are set as currently active or able to view on the opening of the note. Sometimes there are pieces in a note that are only occasionally used, and when that happens, we don't put them all sort of on the front page in your face right off the bat. If I click on Modify Template, it shows me all those sections that are built into the note, and they're all checked off, meaning that they're going to be displayed when the note is opened. Down at the bottom here, we have one that's not checked off. So this one is when I, as a digital health technician person have to go in and maybe make an edit or a fix to a note if there's been an error in registration. We don't always go back to the end user to make those fixes and updates, and sometimes the analysts do resolve certain issues. And so if I do that, I'm going to want to leave information in the note as to exactly what I've done, when it was done, why it was done. And so then I would click that and say, okay. And now that section that previously wasn't available is now in this table of contents. And I can, it's a field there that I would enter data into if it was required. So that's something that, future state, there may be fields for different services or specialists or things like that that aren't just sort of going to be on the note right off the hop. Preview, same as what it looks like on the Documents tab, right side, bottom, or closed. So if I close it, you just get the full note on the screen. If you have right side preview, it just allows you to sort of see how the note is going to look when you save it as you're typing and entering the information into the note. Refer to note and copy forward. I'm actually going to save and close this one. And I'm going to open a new one. So we're going to say, if you're doing one assessment per registration and a patient was discharged and they've come back, or notes that you do on a daily basis, and you would just like to reference or pull something forward from a note that you previously completed, that's where you can use these two. So if I click on Refer to Note, it opens up a panel here. And on the far left column will be a list of all the therapies documents and dates where there have been previous ones completed. So right now the grouping up here is by date of service. They could be grouped by visit date. So basically a registration date. So if I highlight my previous document on the far right panel, I get a preview of all the information that was entered in that previous document. And in the middle section, there is a little, gives me it's actually the name of the document or the header in the document. So history, a blank checkbox, and an expand symbol. Those tiny little plus signs mean that the section can be expanded. So when I click on it, I get more blank boxes. And basically for every section that had some data entered into it in the previous document, in that document, there's a checkbox. So if there's a field that I wanted to reference or bring forward, refer to in my new note, I would just check off that box and then click Reference Items in Note, and then it would bring over that information. So here is the field that I had checked off with pre-admission information, and the information that was in there from my old note will appear. And then within the note, it will say this data was referenced from Therapy Services Assessment on January 25th at the specific time. And then I can add new information to it as well. If I wanted to copy forward, so this is often used, so in nursing, if they had done a nursing admission, there's sections in there that cover history, previous hospital admissions, medical history, surgical history, and So they completed an admission, patient discharged, a month later the patient's backed. All that medical history hasn't changed. It may be added to, but the old history is still going to be there. So instead of having to manually re-enter those old histories into charts, you can copy it forward from an old note or a previous note. So if you had something like that in some of your therapies documents and it's a readmission, you're doing a new note, and you want to bring that history forward, this is very, very similar to the refer to note. It's when I first click on the document, I don't see that preview over on the right-hand side. And there's two tabs when you do copy forward where it's only going to show the things that I've selected out of this menu in the middle, or it's going to show me the whole note so I can take a look at it and go, yes, that is pertinent information that I want to bring into the new note, and then I can determine to click it off so that it will copy it forward. Once I've selected the pieces of the previous note that I want to copy into the new note, I just click copy items into the current note. It works very, very similar to the refer to note. It just won't have this data referenced piece on top of it. It will just bring it forward without the data referenced piece. I used the same field when I did my refer to note and copy forward, so it's still showing the data reference. But so those can be useful functions. I know with some of the physicians in the other facilities or other instances, where they have a progress note one day and, they've got a bunch of discussion in there and then they just want to make an update to that discussion, they will bring forward that old discussion into the new note and then add their notes to that. So that you're not retyping a lot of information that's just redundantly entered. So those are the copy forward and refer to note functions. And if you forget your mandatory field, it will remind you when you go to save it that you did not complete it. So now we have the two notes here because I saved two different notes, and you can see how it identifies the different services if it's saved to a specific service. Now, if you happen to complete a note and save it on an incorrect patient, you can delete the note. It gets trickier when there are multiple people who have documented on a note as to how to cancel a note, because if there were a lot of people who documented within the same note, you don't want to necessarily delete the whole note because then everybody else would have to re-enter their charting. But if you were the primary contributor to the note or the sole contributor to the note, it may be easier just to cancel the note than to try and make a bunch of edits to it. So if you need to cancel a note, you highlight the note. If it's something that it was documented on the wrong person and now you want to enter that information on the correct person, you could print it first so that you have a record, to refer to as you're re-entering information. There's no copy forward or copy and paste that you can use between two different patients. And then once you have printed it, there's two ways to cancel. So if you've double clicked on it so that you can print it and you're on this screen, the printer's in the top right corner, and if you take your mouse all the way down to the bottom left corner, you'll see a very small icon that looks like a piece of paper with an X on it. And when you click on that, it's a cancel document option. So if you do that, it says, heads up, once it's canceled, we cannot reinstate it, and you do need to enter a reason for canceling it. It's a drop-down box that has a couple pre-populated reasons. Most common is that it's been entered on the incorrect patient. If that's not the reason and you have a different reason for canceling it, you can free text in a reason as well. If I cancel this and I go back to my main screen, I've highlighted the document I want to cancel. There is a tab toolbar icon that also says cancel or delete. So when I click on that, I get the same window, again reminding me that once it's canceled, I can't retrieve it. enter my reason for canceling it, and say OK. It never actually deletes it from the chart, but it strikes it out and strikes out all the information. If you see a struck out document and you want to know what the reason was for canceling the document, you can click on the right click on it and go to View Document Details. And then click on the Status tab, and it's going to show the time it was canceled and the reason for canceling. All right, I think we will take a look at progress notes now, just because they operate slightly differently. So progress notes are basically big blank white boxes. Progress notes actually are a note where modify template does apply to the therapies. So in a progress note, you have a big white blank box. It has a character limit, I believe, of 25,000 characters. If you happened to fill that all up and run out of room on a particular note, if you go to Modify Template, there is a box where you can click off additional information, which will give you another large free text box. The reason our boxes have character limits is that, like any computer system, if you put too much information in one pot, it slows the whole system down. It would slow saving the document. It would slow down opening the document. So we keep those character limits at certain numbers that have been tested by the company. Their recommendations that we don't make a field any bigger than this because it just starts to bog down the system. So in this case, the Modify Template has that additional information that's not automatically displayed on the screen, but if you needed more room to document, it would be available to you. Again, all the therapies have their services choice, and then in your white box. So recommended process for documenting in a progress note, because there can be multiple entries on a note by multiple services or persons. We recommend that when you're documenting, and you will see if you're familiar with reading the nursing progress notes, that it's the same way as put in your time and then enter your documentation. And then do a signature in the note. So the note will still be saved with an electronic signature, but it's always going to show sort of the last person that had saved the note or it had last updated by. And when you're reading through a lot of just free text charting with different time entries, it gets hard to disseminate who wrote what when. So just for ease of reading and review of the note, and with nursing, it's always first initial, full last name, and their designation. Therapies, I'm sure you have a protocol for how you enter your signature and notes, so follow your protocol for that. And then, you know, the next person that came along can just hit enter and put their next comment underneath there. And so on through the note. And then whoever is saving it at that time would be saving it. Again, we only want one note per 24-hour period. So you want to always come and check, you know, if you're coming to do some charting on a patient, always click on the Documents tab and see if somebody started a progress note today. And if they have started a progress note today within your department, I know SLPs and OTs each, I believe, have their own progress notes. Maybe it's discharge summaries. I'm not 100% sure right now, but as you review your notes, and then you would just modify it. And then Now, when it comes to late or delayed entries in a progress note, and this is not likely to happen as frequently in the therapies as it does with nursing, because we created this note originally at this time, we can't alter the date of service, each time we open it. That was sort of the original creation of the note, and so that's why we enter our times as we're documenting through here. If I was a nurse and, the student had done some charting on their assessment on the patient, but I had actually given a medication at 7 in the morning and I didn't get to chart it right away, within this note, I can, enter it chronologically. So when somebody's reading it, it's going to, make sense logically how I read it. When we were charting on paper and we had a late entry, you always had to chart underneath all the other handwriting. And so you would, put your time in, and sometimes you'd chart it in red, and then you would, write in brackets that it's a late entry so that people knew that you had things were out of order and they weren't reading, the most recent information on the patient. So I could put in my time, and then I usually like to identify why, because if someone was reviewing that corrections view, they would see that, all the entries for 8, 10, and 1500 were there, and then all of a sudden this one for 7 o'clock appeared in the changes. So I like to leave my rationale for, having altered the sequence in the note. So I just put in brackets late entry just to identify it. So that's how I do late entries. Now on this note, if someone had happened to have charted on the incorrect patient, this is one that, maybe I even charted, 3 different things that were on the correct patient, but but one of them I had done on the wrong patient and saved it. So I don't want to really cancel the entire note like I did with the assessment. So what our recommendations are, if there's something that's been entered on the wrong patient within the note, leave the time and the signature as part of the note, highlight and delete the contents, but replace it again with why you have removed it. So same reason, because if the chart is ever reviewed in court or legal and they're looking as to why something was deleted from the note, we want to leave our reasoning right there. Because I don't know, if you're like me, if I do something and then you ask me 4 hours later why I did that, I probably don't even remember that I did it. So I would delete that and then just put in brackets charted on the incorrect patient. And then that way, if anybody's looking through there and they go, something was removed from the chart, why was it removed? Oh, there is the reason right then and there as to why it was removed. So we've looked at copy forward, refer to note, preview, right bottom, how to modify the template, add sections that aren't on the screen right in front of you, acronym expansion, service selection, mandatory fields, printing, saving. So in this case, I have made modifications to the note and my save button is grayed out. And you prompts the question as to why. So it's kind of, I think it's a safety feature. To me, it's kind of like a glitch. But when I open a note to modify it, and I've only clicked into one section of the note, it just doesn't recognize the modification. So all you have to do is just click somewhere else on the screen that's not in the field where you had started making modifications or entries on the note, and then the save buttons become active. So then you can see, the modifications. I got a late entry, I deleted it. If I go to review those corrections, got my original version, I've got my version where I modified it, shows me what was there before, what is there currently, and just captures all those pieces of data. So I think I have covered most things with the documentation. I didn't show you. I said I was going to show you preferences and toolbar. We did document entry, we did acronym expansion, and then there's also toolbar preferences. So when I click on that, I have these two panels, which we see a lot in SCM. It's always the left-hand one is all my available options, right-hand one are my current selections. So this always says current toolbar. It's the main toolbar, and these are the shortcuts or icons that are displaying in the main toolbar. So when we set up your account, we apply a profile, which displays our primary or our most used current icons. But as we implement more functionality, you may find that you want to add some of the other shortcuts, like our allergy summary, or there's a health issues is currently up there. We're not using it, but there will soon be some health issues in some of our documents that are coming up, or the newer ones. So just a way to know that. Also underneath for your main toolbar and your tab toolbar, it is default set to show the text labels under your icons. So those words that tell you what those little pictures actually mean, you have the option to turn those off as well. And you can also adjust the size of your icons on the screen. So you can set them to small icons. By default, they are large icons. So just a little bit of information on your preferences for your toolbar. I'm briefly just going to do a quick review for you on patient lists. So you've got your primary patient lists are automatically there. If they weren't, or you want to add a list to a new area, you can click on a new visit list. Then there are options for your list. So right now, I don't think I have therapists set as a provider. That might change. So with your role or provider, most of these lists or all of these lists are built on location. So if you're building a new location list, you would click on the tab for location, click on the third circle where you only want to include patients at a specific location, expand Victoria Hospital, and then all the areas that we do registrations to should show up. Victoria Hospital inpatient also expands and then has all the other areas in there. NICU, day surgery, nursery, obstetrics are all in there as well. Right now, I have a little glitch with our mental health. Oh, maybe they are showing up here right now in this one. I don't know if they are in production right now. Mental health. Child and youth is here. Mental health adult is not here right now. So there's a little glitch in the system as to why these areas aren't showing up to make a patient list. But when you've selected a section, you click add. It's over in that left-hand panel. You can say okay. And currently no patients registered, and this is in our test environment. So we just haven't registered anybody, but in real life you can be. Now, if you want to modify a list, so if I pick my for surge list and I can go to modify, this is created by location, but perhaps, you know, if I'm a physician, I can make a list of patients where I am the provider and my role is that I'm the attending or I'm the family physician for that patient. I can create a list for all my patients so that, you know, if I look at that list, any patient that I've been identified as the family physician that is in the specified locations that I've picked will show up on my list. You can also make edits to the visit status. So if you wanted to look back and go, I want a list of all the patients that were registered or discharged between these dates, again in my specified location, you've got those filters that you can apply to visit lists as well. These lists here, I said, are living lists. So basically, they are lists that should interact or react to registrations, and discharges. If you have a list of patients that you're following, and maybe you're following a few patients on different units, you can actually create personal lists. So if I'm following these two patients on level 4, I can click Save Selected Patients after I've highlighted them. Call your list whatever you want and say OK. When I create a list by saving patients off of what I call the enterprise defined list, I've now created what they call a special list or a personal list. And the name of my list will have a little asterisk or star beside it. And that's how it's identified as a personal list versus a enterprise defined list. So if I go back now to maybe I have a couple patients on level 5. So I'm going to highlight those patients, go to the Save Selected Patients button. I'm going to add them to the same list because these are still my current patients. And now I have the 4 patients that I'm following on this list. These lists that are special or personalized lists don't react to the registration system. So the patient may get discharged or transferred even to another unit. They're not going to disappear off this list. They would disappear off of these lists and either appear on a different unit or disappear completely. But when I've added them to my personal list, they don't disappear. I have control over that. So I can, if I'm following up next week, someone was discharged on Friday and I was off, I come back on Monday, I want to take a look at, that patient. They're discharged, but they're on my list. So I can review the discharge notes. And then if I'm completely done following this patient and I don't need to review any more information or adding more information, I highlight the patient and I can remove the selected visit. And then they're gone from my list. And at any point, I can go back to another list, pick a different one, and add to my list. So just a few different tips for, managing patient flow. Right now, I don't have it set up so that you can print these lists, but there is a way to print them if that's something that is valuable. There can also be extra per column. So these columns are just sort of the standard ones. And again, if we go to the icon that says Select Visit List Columns, got the 2 panels, currently selected columns that are displayed, other ones that are available. Most of these are system defined columns, but we can build some custom ones. So pharmacy techs we've built an additional free text column where they can enter some basic information. There's not a lot of free text, but just if they're following. So at some point we might be able to create what they call a provider list. So you could have a therapies list. So if you were handing off patients between therapists, it would be accessible to other people rather than just your personalized list. But that's future conversation. In this view of the patient list, the flag new will alert you if you want to be flagged if there's new results or new orders. We're not using new documents or new orders like an order entry right now or unacknowledged alerts. This to sign column, if somebody had re-entered notes for you and you were the author and they had entered it, there would be a flag in here highlighting that you would need to sign off on that note. And I just remembered one thing that I did forget to show you, and this is a process that you guys can determine again within the department. But if you have students that are entering documentation and you would like to be able to review and sign off on their documentation, the document info here, you can have a student assign you as a co-signer to the note. So even though they're doing the authoring and they're the author, they can assign you as a co-signer. So they can type in other and they would pick your name off the list and say OK. And then you would see that you had been assigned as a co-signer here. When the student signs off on that note, then you would have a flag in that to sign column. alerting you that that document was available for you to review and sign off on. So you would probably have to make a small modification. Sometimes you just have to like add a dot or something in order for you to be able to save it and sign off on it. If it's, progress notes, you can always add a statement saying, have I reviewed the information that's been entered and agree with it, and then save it as well. So those are just other options that are available and workflows within the departments. Now I think I've covered everything within the notes, so I'm going to sign off, and you guys can always get a hold of me if you have any questions going forward about things, and I'll always do my best to answer them. Thank you.